digital innovation, tunaangalia internet and data governance, maswala ya digital information literacy, maswala ya emerging technology kama artificial intelligence, but the core area of our work is promoting and championing technological adaptation within a democratic digital framework. So hiyo evolution of activism katika the topic of today, it's a very interesting area of work you also look into, especially when it comes to gender relations na maendeleo that comes with technology. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Dr. Bireete, are you able now to transition so we can hear from you? Sarah? I would really like to hear from you. Sijui kama umeweza kupata kusort changamoto ya connection. Okay, you'll alert me ukiweza kusort out so that we can introduce you as well, but we'll move on to our conversation. Because I wanted to hear from you, Dr. Bireete, first about, you one of being the seasoned activists, and you and Shangazi Ananilea. Probably I'll wait for both of you to join in so that you can involve us in your journey. But probably if we can start off from where we are right now, the modern day and age of activism, how things are happening right now, and how we see things in our day-to-day activities. So I think, sorry, Dr. Bireete, I'm seeing you've been able to join in.
Yes, please. I am able to. Good evening, Shangazi and the colleagues on the space.
Karibu sana. Dr. Bireete, please go ahead and introduce yourself and highlight your areas of activism.
Yes, I'm Sarah Bireete, a lawyer and a human rights defender, also election observer. So my areas of activism are protection of rights, freedom of speech, association and assembly, but also promotion of credible, free and fair elections. But generally, on a broader terms, I work on constitutionalism and the promotion of social justice. Thank you.
Very well said. And I would have loved for you and Shangazi Ananilea, as I'd mentioned, I would have loved for you, both of you, to start us off in this conversation because you're more, you've been in this game for quite some time. So I would have loved both of you to probably give us a historical context, but we can get to hear from you now. And, as Africans, we are often proud that we get to celebrate our deep roots and rich history in activism, yeah? So how have the methods and platforms of activism evolved from your generation to present day? I'd like to hear from you, Dr. Bireete.
Yeah, thank you so much. So in the earlier days, I think it's important to note, first of all, that activism has evolved across generations, reflecting the changing societal priorities, communication methods, and cultural contexts. So whenever each generation is faced with a different cultural context, but also with different means of communication and different priorities of society. But there are some aspects of activism that have cut through from the 18th to 19th century up to date. So we have had under the 18th and 19th century, the key focus or areas of activism were rights and reforms. And this was done through social movements for the abolition of slavery, for women suffrage in elections, for women's rights to work, for women's rights equal pay, which we are still advocating for, but it started long before, as well as the methods that were used then. We had protests, we had pamphlets, we had the distribution of pamphlets, we had speeches, petitions, but also peaceful protests where, as you see, activism all over the world, people would gather and freely walk from one distance to a remarkable historical point and then deliver the speech, like the famous Martin Luther King speech of I Have a Dream. But also these speeches were happening across the world through protests and movements. This time was characterized by the issues were highly localized, dependent on print media, but also public gatherings because of the nature of the context they were in. And in the early 20th century, that is 1990s to 1940s, then the focus moved to social justice and labor rights. There were workers' movements and colonial struggles, the unions, workers' unions organizing strikes, marches as methods of protest. And the key notable figures in this era, you have Gandhi, as well as, Eugene Debs and other key historical figures in this era of protest. This era was characterized by a rise of organized labor and mass movements, influence of early global communication, mainly the telegram. These are days of the telegram, days of email had not come, so you had the telegram and fax as ways of communication, but also labor movements with the rise and a little communication via, although it was, like telegram was received by a few people in formal places of work. Then we had the post-war era, the 1950s to the 1970s. The key focus in this era was the civil rights and war protests and feminist movements. So you have the feminist, there are issues that cut across the rights, the feminist movements, and independence struggles or self-determination struggles, which are still being faced today in the second wave of feminism, with the sit-in marches, sit-in strikes, marches, nonviolent resistance, and media coverage. So this is a period that was dominated by radio, international media, local media, the emergence of radio in that era, that people were able to listen and follow what was happening in different areas of the world. And key notable figures in this era include Martin Luther King Jr., Malcolm X, Gloria Steinem, and others. And this was a beginning era of television, but mainly radio. And the key actors were grassroots movements, which gained a lot of momentum as social movements for mobilizing and protesting. In the late 20th century, this is 1980s and 1990s, you have a key focus on globalization and identity politics. And the movements, this includes the emergence of sexual rights, environmental activism, and apartheid movements. And the methods included boycotts, global campaigns, and other digital organizing. Notable figures here include Nelson Mandela and others, especially the ACT UP activists. Take action, time for action. Activism became more globalized. This is the beginning era of NGOs and targeted campaigns. And in the early 21st century, if I may go faster, 2000, 2010, you have a key focus on digital activism and intersectionality. Movements like Occupy Wall Street, Black Lives Matter, climate action, Fridays for the Future started emerging using social media, viral campaigns, and online petitions. Notable figures under this include Greta, Alicia Ganza, among others. And the characteristics are internet, enabled rapid mobilization, focus on intersectional issues. So the localization reduced in this era. And if we look at the current trends today, we have a key focus on climate crisis, radical justice, or against racial justice, sorry, gender equality, and digital privacy. The movements among in this era include the Me Too and authoritarian protests, e.g. in Hong Kong and Iran, and the methods used are centralized organizing, blockchain technology for fundraising, and are all driven by internet to create awareness. You have youth-led movements among this era that are taking the dominant character, and activism is increasingly global and tech-driven. So this is the era that we are in of the silent generation. No, the generational shifts include the silent generation, which focused on institutional reforms, civil rights. You had the baby boomers of anti-war protests. We have the area activism, and the key focus that has cut through is that the activism is focused on rights, reforms, social justice, broadly. Those are the use of protests, petitions, mobilizing around social movements, use of media, either traditional or new media. So when it comes to the life we have lived, we grew up where activism started in universities and schools of education, protesting against any cases of injustice, including bad meals, bad governance. That's how we rose to, to activism, the activism rather through schools, school leadership and protests and strikes. University, where now you participate in national issues, national campaigns, and then the work field, where we fail in the rights, human rights side, activism for good governance, transparency, quality elections. And that's how my journey has been, more or less, including the fight against corruption and for increased transparency and accountability. This is the intro that I can give for now.
Sorry, you've gotten cut short at the end, but thank you for giving us that very broad understanding of the transition from traditional methods. You've explained about the street protests to now you've mentioned that how modernized things are, the modern approaches that most activists are taking right now, which includes probably social media campaigns to speaking actively in the digital spaces. And now if I can bring in that aspect of the social media campaigns and digital spaces, I want to hear from two of our shangazis who are very active in this field, who are always mobilizing people online and just organizing all these social media campaigns. As now we discuss the impact of technology and social media into this activism space, let's shift a bit to the modern day and age. So how things are happening right now, even as we see it in our day-to-day activities. And of course, we are seeing right now in the digital age that social media plays a very key role in activism. And we have seen most activists use this, even from the older generation. How has its rise influenced the effectiveness and the reach of activist movements? Let's hear from Rachael, then AshaDii.
Thank you so much, Joy. And I wouldn't want to take a lot of time because also it's holiday. I really appreciate even the topic of today, which is today's activists rewriting the rule book. If you look in terms of how things are evolving, one, I need to acknowledge first that social media is playing a very big role, and that's technology in terms of organizing and mobilizing. But at the same time, I will not want us to lose the traditional way of organizing. What my previous Shangazi Dr. Bireete said that there are social movements, or there were social movements who used to do, or are still, which I'm also part of, majority organic way of mobilizing. And what I've seen, I can give two examples of end femicide in Kenya, and what we have seen with the GNZ movement is that as much as a lot of work was done through the social media, but a lot of also work was done offline, with people organizing their community and doing also education for people to understand why we're going to protest, what's the reason, and if we are resisting or rejecting some policies or bills that are brought by duty bearers, how is it impacting my life politically, economically, socially, and even now you have seen environmentally. And then for me, seeing this example, what I'm able to look is that we can't deny still where we are as global south or global majority, as some will call, is that we still struggle with accessibility of digital space. At the same time, there's still hope that as much as we are struggling with accessibility, for the few who own digital space, even the grassroots like myself, based in Madare, is that we're able to use our technology as communal, not one person, communal, where we're able to say we have a Zoom call, can we use my phone or can we use someone's computer to be able to communicate and share idea. And some of the good example that I'm able to say is that the end femicide movement has been able in Kenya and even globally to be successful because of social media. There are also like campaign which I'm part of, like the Pussy Power movement. The reason why we're also very impactful and strong even globally is because of digital space. But at the same time, we have to acknowledge that even this Twitter we are using is very patriarchal. A lot of activists, a lot of women and feminists, we don't feel safe or in digital spaces as Twitter. And in Kenya is a good example where we are seeing even now there's a cartel that if you're able to critique the president or if you're able to critique the government, people are being abducted, people are being killed. And even it comes back to even if we are using the space, our space is our safer is our civic space in digital spaces. If, for example, we're able to say we are strong on the street, but seeing now governments coming up with crackdown of civic space, with the criminalization of Article 37, where now for you to, even if you still give notification to do protests, because before you do protests, we try other mechanism of dialogue, consensus, or petition, and when it fails is when you go to the streets. But you could see what we have been fighting to protect is being taken away in Kenya. And it's not only in Kenya, I've seen also with protests even in Nigeria. The way youth have been killed, we've seen it in Ghana. I've seen my comrades being also brutalized by police. The same also what we went through last week here in Kenya, which was not good. It was a very bad experience. That's why even can hear my voice. But you see, we can't still give up. There's new emergency of Gen Z or all generation, because after now the Gen Z, what I've been able to observe is that all generation now, people are really interested in TikTok. People are really interested in WhatsApp, because also you can't deny that traditionally or even based on technology, people are still using also WhatsApp for a lot of things, sharing information, organizing. But at the same time, for me as Rachel, I know my constituency of people in the grassroots, majority are not on Twitter, majority are on Facebook. So if I have to share information or mobilize, I have to use Facebook, because a lot of my constituency and people that I know that are from my grassroots or people I know who are my target audience are this. If I want to use Twitter, maybe it's when I want to deal with duty bearers. And what we are seeing also, and one of the things that also we are doing as a trend, as our movement, is a trend to see technology facilitated GBV, because it's increasing. People are being, women human rights defenders, we are being bullied, we are being threatened, and then there's lack of accountability in terms of holding duty bearers. But the other point I wanted to talk about is also like how do we localize all these digital rights or social media to strengthen our activism? And this I've seen also from the level of resource mobilization. We've seen people like Hanifa and many of us in the space and activists in the grassroots using the social media space also to resource money to support the causes. We have seen also social media being used as a tool for solidarity building and sharing information. We have seen trends like, for example, of our comrade Boniface Mwangi, Free Boniface Mwangi, now it went viral. We have seen also the Kitengela 3. We have seen also justice for even the hashtag #NFemicide even like now we have our own hashtag as Pussy Power Movements or CGHRD around Tunawin Vita Zote. Why are we using this hashtag and why are we using words like Tunawin Vita Zote? Because All our rights are connected. So I can't say because I'm organizing on land or I'm organizing on seed or food sovereignty that I can't use social media. I can still use social media to hold also company accountable. And we have seen even in Kenya that through social media, even when the flood started in Madare, we're able to use social media. If you watched on how I was able to tweet, to be able to get the information from the people in my community how they want it to be framed, but use social media to push our county government and our national government to be responsive despite they're not responsive. On the other hand, also, it has been a tool of learning for our generation because through even now what we are saying, today's activists rewriting the rule book. Yes, we are rewriting the rule book. And also, for example, maybe the other question I can ask Joy, do we really need the rule book? Because also looking with the governments and the institutions that some of them we are dealing with, and the kind of propaganda they're also perpetuating on digital spaces, it's causing a lot of harm than progressiveness. And that's why activists like ourselves, we have the responsibility and our community to continue holding our leaders accountable and tech companies in terms of ensuring that they ensure the internet is healthy. And when I mean healthy, is the way we say your right to health, like lazima ukue, uko na afya nzuri. So pia internet with the advancement of technology, we have to ensure it's healthy for everybody. It's healthy to be used also by people with disability because also it has to be very inclusive. And that's why my role also as a feminist activist is to push tech companies, tech spaces currently to be very feministic and very inclusive of gender non-conforming people and minority groups. Yeah, back to you, Joy.
Thank you so much, Rachel. For I've actually enjoyed hearing of your experience, especially because you're fresh out of the streets, juicy too, and you've been able to highlight what it means to you and your movements and your various initiatives of how the use of online platforms and social media in mobilizing support, raising awareness and influencing policy changes. So probably if I can hear from someone else who's in the digital space, AshaDii, your thoughts on this.
Hey Joy, yeah, thank you very much. And yeah, really loving the conversations. Well, I think I would start by not, first of all, not repeating what has already been said, but I would like to emphasize on how it shows the nature and the environment and certain attributes at a national level has so much influence in the kind of conversation and the kind of advocacy and activism done, especially on digital spaces. And while we might have examples that are drawn locally, you would find that the intensity, well, because I might mention that we have a certain campaign at local context, maybe Tanzanian context, but when you do it comparatively, you get to understand it comparatively, whether it's with Uganda, whether it is with Kenya, you will see that there are so many key features and attributes that showcase how different these campaigns that are done and activism which is done online. I just loved how I just loved how Dr. Sarah had shared and given us an evolution of how activism used to be done. Now, when you go to that, you look at it goes on showing how we have current problems and challenges that comes with activism, and I would like to point out at that. And one of them has to do with information has to do with information integrity. Back then, when activism was done on the ground with flyers, messages, and whatnot, there was a very small room of any kind of misinformation, creating propaganda compared to the current state of it. With the nature of social media being very decentralized as opposed to be centralized. Of course, there are pros and cons. When it was centralized, there was an advantage that any kind of information that was shared, in most cases, it was yes, it was to some extent, to a very great extent, positive. But right now, it's different with decentralization of activism, as in from a leadership level of activism to individual level of activism. There are positives which we've just heard here from Rachel, and of course there are negatives, and the negatives comes in a very at a very high cost, especially when you have a community and a society that is has a bigger number of people who are using it because how are using it for the role of misinformation. So we look at the challenges. I think one of the best ways of looking at this and understanding the space is first looking at the challenges that are not reaching the core value, because if the campaigns are being done, activism is being done digitally, and there is results like the one done in Kenya. I think the one done in Kenya is an example to many countries. The Gen Z, the Gen Z campaign, social media campaign, which was done. I think that was a great example. Now, when you have challenges into that aspect, but the impact was very big, it's not really that bad. But when you have a society or community where there is a lot of misinformation into the activism that is being done, now that creates a challenge, because one, you have a society which doesn't fully understand, and in most cases they've chosen to respect, and they've chosen to trust the person that they follow, the kind of information that you share. So if it's misconstrued, when it is wrong, when it is what, it affects the bigger community. And now it affects the bigger community. And while in most cases we usually refer to public social medias, we are talking about maybe Twitter, which is maybe the most responsible for accountability, or Facebook or Instagram. We tend to forget WhatsApp, where there is huge impact. And while we can't really measure the impact, we can sort of measure in a way that we had very many different groups, and we see content from social media circulating. While there can be people who are very hesitant and very worried to publicly participate online, they can at least now share the online space, share their thoughts through maybe WhatsApp, as much as sio wote, and sio wote wanakuwa wanafanya hivyo. But then again, back to the reflection of the role of activism into the current space, and depending on the group of who is doing activism. Yes, everybody's there, and I'm repeating what Rachel said. Like, yeah, we have elders there, we have very a variety of ages on the spaces, but we do agree that the Gen Z are the majority. Now, not to sound very bad, we have several activists trying to do a lot of activism. I remember, I think in the last 3 months, there is an activist, but more, I would say a lawyer, but also an activist, Tito Magoti. He has tried like twice to do the campaign. So the way it works in our space, the first one, I think it was very successful, because I follow a lot and I follow very closely this kind of conversation. It was activism around sharing messages and sharing messages and sharing a certain message to a certain email in the government, to share a certain message in the certain email. The response of the first the response of agency of the first campaign, I think it was very successful according to his metrics and how he wished it would be. You wouldn't compare it to the second one. And that is where I'll go back to what I was saying just when we started. I think we need to understand our spaces, the kind of people that are there. You would find that the way you would influence a sense of urgency in the space in Uganda is way different from Kenya. It's way different from Tanzania, and that is why in cases where there are so many there are changes such as emerging technology or AI, or maybe the changes that comes with such technologies such as deepfakes and what it would you would find that Kenya has an opportunity, or I would say Kenya is more subjected to be early exposed to such technologies, because somehow, and it really pains to say so, because somehow maybe there are certain groups, not certain groups. I think certain groups are all in all countries, a bigger number of youth who are very interested in certain aspects of the agenda that they are trying to push online. Yeah, thank you. Back to you, Joy.
Um, i- i- Thank you so much, AshaDii. There's something you have mentioned there, and if we bring in now that we are here talking about intergenerational collaboration, we've already heard from experiences how it was in the times for Dr. Bireete and how it is now for some of us. We've even heard from Rachael, and we've seen her past experiences. And right now, we're even seeing, we've already mentioned the aspect of Gen Zs of Kenya really stepping up to speak up on societal injustices. So, Asha, you've also mentioned some of the challenges that are there for now, but how can we make these different generations work together effectively in that the spirit of activism just doesn't die? Or the way Rachael actually asked me, do we really need a rule book in the first place? Probably if I hear from Dr. Bireete first.
So I don't think we need a rule book in the first place, because there are factors that have been constant in activism. One is the collective needs of society. If you look at the apartheid struggles, if you look at the civil rights movement in the US, the pre-independence struggles in Africa, the rights movement by Gandhi in India, it's the common good of the people that determines what moves society to protest and push back. The second issue that determines is what are the available means. So whereas the likes of Patrice Lumumba and Kwame Nkrumah would use Telegram because there were no other quick means of communication, we are on Twitter speaking. We are using the technological advancement. Also, the other determinant is what are the values, the generational values of the day. Our values today is that whereas our countries have achieved independence, have attained, the consensus on how to be governed, this consensus is betrayed. The social contract, done by the people and their leaders during elections, it is not upheld. And then that's why you see the Gen Zs rising up against corruption, against the rising authoritarianism in Kenya, against high taxation. In Uganda, we are rising up against the life presidency. We are rising up against family rule. We are rising up against unfair elections and closing civic space. In Tanzania, there are issues of closing civic space and one-party rule in the name of CCM, 50 years in power. So you have, each country has these, generational values that are betrayed, that causes the people to rise up and say no. The other element we have is, we need to look at the shifting dynamics of power. The duty bearers vis-a-vis the power holders or the rights owners and duty bearers, they are shifting dynamics around that. Whereas today leaders are answerable to being called out on social media. I have watched Ruto several times being uncomfortable and saying how he's nicknamed Zakayo. I've mentioned several leaders comment about cartoons. We have even not mentioned the artistic way of protest and advocacy, like use of cartoons, that is very powerful. So we have had leaders having to respond to cartoons in Kenya, in Uganda, in Tanzania, and it gets to them. In some extreme instances, we have the use of radical rudeness. Radical rudeness is a traditional method that has always existed in our society. When people talk rudely to you, because of the thick neck of impunity, you have failed to listen to the decent words. And then they use the bad words that shake you out of your power, and you reduce on your arrogance or impunity. We have had cases of radical rudeness in Uganda through Dr. Stella Nyanzi. We have the current president of Law Society, the Radical New Bar, where there is use of radical rudeness when necessary. And we have had these, challenges with the DPP. How do you call me this name? but it's to wake you up, the shock, that shock of that rude word that shakes you out of your impunity, because you have failed to listen to common sense and common decency. We also have, activism in a way where we are in a digital spaces, battling challenges of misinformation and disinformation, and we are trying to renovate ways of reality check. Is this message true? Is this real? Is this misinformation? So there is also a pushback on technological activism through misinformation, disinformation, deep fakes, and all other vices that we are faced with. So when you look at this, the bottom line is that there must be generational values, and there must be a common good that a collective of activists are working to achieve. These are common denominators that cut across all generations of activism up to date. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Bireete. Rachel, can hear from you on the same.
Yeah, like for me, I want to look at different intersectionality of levels of struggle. For example, we are seeing the threat, let's say, on the seeds rights or food sovereignty or seed sovereignty. Kenya recently, we are seeing they have given, gets immunity. And when you give immunity, it means we'll have multinational companies violating human rights, and then they're not held accountable. And this is a trend that I like many of us within the continent to look clearly, apart from just government, how do we hold multinational company or private sector accountable to human rights violation, including that one. I'm very clear, I'm anti-GMO, but seeing on our farmers, even my own community, which is Kamba community, being criminalized, peasant farmers being criminalized, majority also who are our members, because of them ensuring that they protect our seeds like the green grams and coming up with laws that ensure that it's not protecting farmers. I think, and I'd encourage even viewers in this space to ensure that we protect our farmers. We protect our farmers even the way we talk on digital space. We protect them even in different spaces where we are seeing also private sector taking advantage of them in terms of also coming with the names of loans of fertilizer, which is not the reality. And then the other point that I really want to bring in is the threats of what also the previous speaker said. I don't think we need to follow the rule book. If the same rule book is being used now currently to criminalize us activists, active citizens, feminists, we are seeing on now organization like, for example, Family Watch International, on how they're penetrating into our governments and ensuring people are bringing family protection bill that criminalizes even single mothers, gender non-conforming people, criminalizing comprehensive sex education, access to safe abortion. And then we are saying we follow the rule book, because if I look within the Kenyan Constitution, it's supposed to protect me. It's a very progressive constitution, but the same rule book is not used by the oppressor. You go, you give notification about protest, or you go, you have your right to speech, or even the press. And we have seen even today, activists in Kenya, 2 guys have been abducted. Until now, they are not yet found. As we went to the streets to march last week on end femicide, it's sad, but even some of us were sexually assaulted by the police and beaten and strangled. We are still in the recovery mode, and we follow that rule book that Joy, you're telling us to follow, of notification, engage duty bearers, they are not your enemy. But what we have received from duty bearers is worse than what we are receiving even from our homes, where we are running away from violence. So for me, I kind of see this kind of intersectionality is that even people who are allies of activists or feminists in our own organizing, we can't deny the power is in our community. And one of the things that I've seen even within the activism I do, your people, your community will never leave you as long as they believe in the cause. And that's why for me, political education, not partisan, political education, whether it's in activism or feminism or community organizing, it's important to connect our struggle with the lived reality of what is currently going on. But at the same time, also, there's this other hand of also foreign interest. How do we hold foreign governments accountable, who sometimes come to curtail democracy in the name of solidarity or in the name of business and human rights? But at the same time, we're seeing a shift globally and even in Kenya, where until today in Kenya, we don't have a CS for gender. With all the cases of GBV, violence against women and girls, we don't have a CS for gender equality or gender, on state development on gender. We are seeing also globally money being reduced on women's rights, feminist organizing, but at the same time, we are seeing innovation on grassroots community where also people within the community reaching out to high net worth individuals who can support the work we all do. But the other thing that I'm seeing in terms of also the focus on technology is that there's so much need also to debunk and decolonize even the innovation around AI to be also like inclusive of Black people like myself or African countries, and also give room for African innovation, especially from feminist also perspective, to be able, and I'm happy also can see Eunice on the call from Akina Mama, shout out, to be able to give room in terms of ensuring that we have feminists who are bringing up ideas in terms of also how these spaces can be more inclusive of ourselves, but also young women and young people from the grassroots community. On the other hand, also seeing people like Maria and Mwanzo, the role you have been playing visibilizing the work of activists is important, which goes back to digital space like the Shangazi. Because to be honest, most of the spaces and media spaces, they're not, the way they are designed, it's for private income or commercial, and not for social justice in terms of visibilizing the radical work that activists we do or feminists we do from our community level. Because for us, what I usually say, we don't do this work for others. We also, because when you defend human rights, also you're defending your rights. You're not defending only just for others. You're also defending for your rights because I'm not free if you're not free. I'm not free when Uganda is activists are being criminalized and beaten. I'm not free when also the abduction is happening in Tanzania. We're seeing it also happening in even Ghana and in Kenya. So you can see these same key players of oppression, they have the same rule book, which does not follow the rule of the law. And then we are expected to deal with the same people in such a way that we assume they understand, whereas they have refused to understand and protect the law. At the same time, I'm seeing also, and this is something also I encourage most of us to look into because of also what the point you're talking about technology. There is a declaration that was made, that was signed. It's called Geneva Consensus Declaration during when Trump was still the president of the US. And now Trump has come back. It means there's a lot of threats even around the sexual, reproductive health and rights. We can't avoid talking about our bodily autonomy, in the integrity, and also if if we want to prevent teenage pregnancy, if you ever want to prevent unsafe abortion, if you want to prevent also school dropouts, and even just from an economic point of view, we lose much when women we are being abused or when we are being killed. So for my perspective around these issues, around we still need to push. We are doing much, but also we need to change our strategy. The oppressors have changed the strategy. I feel us still we need to change our strategy. And some of the things I know we can talk also online, but we need to change our strategy and reorganize and rethink on how to bounce back in a more strategic way. And for example, the Mau Mau fighters in Kenya, they didn't need a playbook. They had their own way of organizing. They didn't need a log framework to fight the colonialists. They did underground organizing. So how does that look like for the continent, despite yes, this technology advancing, but at the same time also, people who work within our own space, we need to think in terms of how to resource grassroots movement and feminist movement, not from a level of only just I and NGOs, because the reality is that we are dealing with people who don't write reports. Like politicians, they don't write reports to fight oppression. And for example, if we feel that we have to do that, because for me, what I feel, accountability is not only just to the people or the partners or the community, is accountability getting across different sector and different constituency where we need to say, this one is working, this one is not working. Like currently, Kenya's most activist people are fearing now to speak online, or we are fearing, me being included, because of the bullying and because of the targets by the government. And if it means if you're not closer to, let's say, with strong networks, it puts your life in danger. But also we have seen also activists who also have strong networks being threatened and intimidated. So even from our end, we need also to see, when we talk about social movements, what do we mean? not NGO projects or not government projects. When we talk about social movement, it means people will be co-opted, like what we are seeing in Kenya, people being co-opted. Like what we are seeing, infiltration is happening, it's real. People being sold out fear. People also having mental health issues because the burnout is real. The outbreak of movement is real. When you're fighting injustice and then you're seeing a court like judiciary failing us in Kenya or exposing most of us to risk. So there's so much joy that we can discuss, but because of time, there's so much even learning within the evolvement of activism from different generations, even academia, where they have a role even with research and data to play, but at the same time, strengthening the point of community speaking for themselves and organization playing the role they need to play, because each one of us has a different role to play. But the oppressors, they're the same. It's just like, um, I think then they also give each other more solidarity in ways that we can't imagine. So it's also up to us. We strengthen our collective solidarity because it's bad seeing Besigye being arrested in Kenya and nothing happens. So I just leave it there and I condemn also that. But ensuring that we build people to people solidarity is strong and cross movement solidarity. Not just because you work on land, you stick on land, or because you work on corruption, you stick on corruption. Activists, we need to give each other cross movement to movement solidarity. Thank you.
Well said, Rachel. I like the fact that you've brought up so many issues and so many things. You've actually given us an insight on some of the recommendations for our future outlook for some of the activism movements that are happening today. AshaDii, I'd like to listen to you as well before I invite probably thoughts and questions from our audience. I'm seeing someone here really
Hi,
wants to
Joy.
speak. Yes, yes, I can hear you. So give us your views before we hear some questions and views from our audience. Especially, I want to hear from people with diverse perspectives from whatever the discussion point has been today. Karibu, Asha. Asha, can you hear me? Okay, nadhani Asha ni kama kidogo amepotea. Probably we can take in a few questions. I'm seeing someone called Ronald. Briefly, engage us. Ronald, if you can hear me, nimekupa mic, so you can briefly share with us your views or your questions from our discussion tonight.
Yeah, asante sana Mwanzo. Ronald Kule from Uganda. Hopefully I'm doing high.
Sorry, if you can be a bit louder. I'm hearing some feedback on your end. Probably rudia tena, if you can reduce the volume on your end. Kuna feedback a little bit in the background. Karibu.
Okay, asante. I am an activist from Uganda and one of the Vice Parliament protesters. I was arrested and the brutality that was exhibited by the police of Uganda in as far as that protest is concerned really portrays that there is need of activists, not only in Uganda, but not only in Uganda, not only in East Africa, but in the entire Africa, to make sure that we do each other's people. You know, we need to create a strong connection between, a strong connection of activists all over Africa, because there is a lot of suppression of activism in these African countries. Uh, to me, from the submissions I've had, at least there is some hope that activists will actually one day do something and change the narrative, the African narrative. But we need to intensify on how we are connected and on how we actually support each other, regardless of our countries, regardless of our, these geographical boundaries. me, that's what I have to submit, that we should know that if an activist in Kenya is facing a certain uh, violation, his rights or her rights are being violated, we should know that as Ugandan activists, we are concerned, and we pick it from there, and then we add our voice to the people of Kenya. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you for that. Thank you for sharing your experience. There was someone else by the name of Nona Nikei Nothing. Briefly share your views or your questions to any of our speakers. Okay, kama hayuko tayari, KE Nothing, I'm seeing your online. Briefly share your views or your comments.
Oh, hi. Hi. Okay, hello everybody. It's a pleasure and an honor to share a platform with you guys. I think it's such a relevant and timely discussion because I think the way forward is to network across Africa so that when there's an issue, there's a challenge in different parts of Africa, they can be amplified because we've been seeing maybe there are challenges in Tanzania, echoing is not enough. Some of those issues. So if we can finally find a way we can network across borders so that as an issue on your side, we amplify, it will give it a global awareness, and probably if it's abduction and other issues, they can be sorted in time. In terms of what activists are doing at the moment, they're doing an excellent job. But unfortunately, it has come with a very high cost because we've seen a lot of fatalities. We have seen people unaccounted people. We have seen forced disappearances. And this has to end because if you look around, the crime is simply speaking truth to power. And there's no crime there because it's the citizens that pay taxes. It's the citizens who are victims. And bad leadership in Africa has to definitely come to an end. Africans are tired. We have an amazing weather country. And for us to say, no, we can do better. But instead, we're seeing leaders within Africa. Like, for example, when there was trouble in Tanzania, on that side, Suluhu was missing, but we knew she had been in Kenya. And when she left, the kind of things we saw her doing was basically a replica of what was happening in Kenya. If it's these bad deals they're imposing in nations like the Adani deal, Kenyans were lucky
Rachel,
to call it
probably
out.
you can give your parting shot as well, as you give your opinion on this.
Thank you. Say that again.
And Joy, I had connection problem. I can hear now.
Go ahead. Thank you. Asha, go ahead. You can just relay your I think unanipata sasa.
Nakupata, sorry, I apologize. Yes, kitu gani ungependa nizungumzie, or just generally we're closing now?
Yes, I'd like you to give your parting shot, because the other speakers they had touched on their views on just the experiences of collaboration, mentorship, and blending traditional and modern activities.
Okay, thank you. I think that's a very important one. If you don't mind, I would also like to touch on that. So fortunately, one of the biggest activism we do it is online, and I think I would like to share the experience that in most cases we are very, very focused online, and we then realize that most of the activism that we are doing in addressing what is occurring online, not necessarily when it comes to governance, but to women, was that we were solving challenges that had already happened. How do we then realize it is better to understand and work on making sure that we address challenges before they have happened? Like, what is the preemptive measures? And that is when you realize that into coming into solutions, you realize that you need different actors. You have to have NGOs that are buying in the agenda, because there is a miscommunication in the. You find that organizations that have resources to address and advocate most of the things that are being advocated, and they have them in the agenda, really don't have an advocacy plan, and sometimes tend to undermine the online platform. Because one of the ways would be, if I know that Rachel works into this space, works on this agenda as a social media activist, as an NGO, how do I make sure that I bring Rachel on board to make sure that the advocacy part, apart from just lobbying, influencing policies, but also creating awareness? I think there has to be an interconnection, and there is a sort of separate, there is a disconnection there. The other challenge is also, I think, undermining the role of civic tech, and and how powerful it could be in influencing change and policy also, or influencing to create a sort of message. And I'm really glad that as time goes on, we have seen that is changing. And that has been in cases like in most example. I think most of the things that have brought a very unified a lot of activists online for Tanzania has been maybe abductions of people getting lost. There is a lot of people, some people losing lives, and you find that if there is a certain agenda that a lot of people feel related to, it sort of brings them, it sort of brings them on board and interconnect them to make sure that they push on that agenda. And yeah, with the limited time we have, I would like to sort of share some sort of recommendation, especially not all countries have an elder generation that tends to understand. I have experienced and seen a lot of older people being very, very negative towards their young ones, embracing the online spaces, especially when it comes to voicing their thoughts, being freely to express themselves online. And when you have this kind of censorship in-house, in families and in homes, it becomes very hard to create a safe space where the young ones and the older one can sort of sit and discuss what is happening, freely advocate and enhance on ways to circumvent, until maybe you find people like maybe Maria with Mwanzo TV, who has been in the space for a very long time, which now then it is in very, very rare cases, and at a very minimal, with a very minimal influence, because you can't reach everyone. So at the end of the day, the fundamental value that emphasizes unity and mutual support among individuals in the community can sort of really bound and maybe solidify activism. I would like to call on I would also like to call on the biggest challenge of technology facilitated gender-based violence, and how any kind of violence that is happening online, instead you find that in most cases, even if you have an agenda, which is very important, like the community that surrounds you are not interested. But otherwise, if it is content that is maybe diminishes your reputation, diminishes the attitude, it sort of brings a lot of people on board. And I would say, I think there is a lot of learnings that we have to have from other spaces and other countries into how do you create that sense of urgency, and that sense of need for young people who are online to be proactive and productive into addressing their matters, instead of just giving up and being more interested in maybe in things that has to do with entertainment. Thank you.
Thank you, Asha. I'd like to take in one more brief question. I'm seeing here Noah, before we hear a parting shot from Dr. Bireete and Rachael. Noah, briefly, just fit your question or your comments or your views on this. Okay, naona ni kama drop. So Dr. Bireete, karibu, just give us your final remarks, and then we'll hear from Rachael.
I think for me, in today's activism, we need to recognize that social media has given everyone a platform, and a voice, as compared to traditional media where people are dependent on invitations from the main media. Now everybody can create a platform, you start speaking like the way we are speaking, and this happens on, it's a permanent platform that everybody has, and this has greatly challenged the way activism is done, even to initiate an issue, to initiate a campaign. So everyone has this role. And sometimes then you come up with, I remember the questions during the Gen Z, protests in Kenya. Who are the leaders? Can you have a leaderless group? If then who will put forward your demand? So also there is that challenge, that as compared to before, where civil rights leaders were known like Martin Luther King, Gandhi, and the others. Today you can have a leaderless movement. Then when it comes time for negotiation and putting forward demands, then there is contestation as to whether you're the true leader of the movement or whether you're speaking on behalf of that movement. So that's the challenge that we have today. The second challenge we need to note is that previously, like for example, if you use the famous movie of Selma, the march to Washington, where the lady that joined Martin Luther King before, and then Martin Luther King had to go and meet the husband and explain why it's important. Even today, there are some new forms that hamper or affect or hinder the participation of women in active movements and the leadership, including the aspect of the men and who holds the power. Do the women need permission? Are you allowed to just march from home, or you have somebody to seek permission from? And the gender-based violence that also affects the women, the cyber harassment that affects the female activists in this new media, where we are saying everybody has a voice. So we need to find a way of pushing back on that cyber harassment for female activists. There was a comment from the participant from Uganda on, the closing space. You are not free to protest. You are not free to demonstrate. Yes, there is a authoritarianism is at its best in Uganda, and we are just being decent by calling the Ugandan regime authoritarian. I think we need to call it its true name, which is a dictatorship, and confront it with the energies and the collectiveness that it deserves, in order to open spaces for everybody and for the citizens to check power excesses, but also to protest and demonstrate freely and hold their leaders accountable. There is still so much work that needs to be done. I agree with the recommendation. I associate myself with the recommendation of building solidarity and networks. We need to work in a collective. We need to show visible solidarity and identify with the causes in different countries in order to make the bigger collective voice of activism to be heard. I thank you very much for this space and for the opportunity to speak on this space. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Dr. Bireete. Karibu, Rachel. Once more, we hear from you.
For me, it's just like to stress on resourcing, continuous resourcing of resistance work, activism, feminism. And when I mean resourcing also, it's also from a public perspective. Public, we should not give up. Let's support frontliners, citizens or activists who are risking a lot, sacrificing a lot on our behalf or on behalf of our countries and continent. So let's ensure we resource them. Anybody also who resource this kind of work, resource crazy ideas. Crazy ideas we have seen in different spaces. They're not like crazy of concepts that also make things work. And then we continue also holding duty bearers accountable, because at the end of the day, we are also paid citizens who pay tax in our countries. So we should continue holding them accountable, be active in public participation, And then the other point is resource protection work, security work for activists or active citizen. And for me, it's not about building, it's about strengthening the existing also structures that are there for solidarity. And for those that don't have to create new ones. And then what I can say is my partition, the future, the present, the current is female for the continent. So we need to ensure we're able to support the female leadership showing up in different spaces in our own diversity. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you, Sana, Dada Rachel. Thank you, Dr. Bireete. Thank you, AshaDii Abinallah, for this insightful conversation. We've been able to get a perspective of how activism has been from the older generation to now the current generation that's here. And probably we've gotten so many takeaways from this conversation, so many recommendations, so many questions to linger. As even Rachel had said, this is a conversation that will not end now. This is a conversation that is very broad. We cannot discuss it in an hour. We cannot discuss it in months. It's something that's ongoing. And probably for an understanding for those who've joined us, or some of the key things that have been mentioned is that I think Rachel mentioned this. It's important to have political education. It's clear that understanding the political landscape is very crucial for effective activism. It's important to have knowledge in all forms. We've already gotten a very expansive history from Dr. Bireete, a very rich history that she's explained, and it has given us a rich overview of the political situation. Get to know the situation in your country, be it Uganda, be it Tanzania, be it Africa. We all share one common heritage. Social aspect is also very important, as this also forms the backbone for any movement. And I think something else that Dr. Bireete mentioned is social media has given everyone a voice. We are all on social media. We all have accounts, and whichever your preferred social media platform is, make use of it. Rachel also said we need to localize how we use social media, and Asha gave us a very, very deep knowledge about the digital space in activism. Choose platforms and adapt platforms that speak to your audience. Something else probably we need to think about is times are changing now. So we must use our tactics to be more effective in advocating for justice and equality. Probably rethink some of the approaches we have in dealing with matters. You know, if placards and street protest worked for that generation, the older generation, what can we use now, probably in not only digital spaces, but what else can we use to get our message across? And most importantly, again, it has been highlighted, solidarity is key. Regardless which country we are from, we've already had experiences from some of our speakers here. And if you were able to tell, we all have similar stories, we all have similar experiences we are going through. We've had what Rachel has gone through. We've had about, if you go and listen to also Sarah's story, you've had, it's not an easy journey. It's a journey that portrays endless fighting and, endless advocacy. So regardless of which country we are from, we must support one another, as we need to show solidarity. It's the same here in Tanzania, in Kenya, or Uganda. You'll find generally our foundation or the things we go through, they're pretty much the same, and we're all fighting for the same cause. So our struggles are interconnected, and Pan-African activism is very key to our success. And something else that we were able to get is that holding multinational corporations is very critical, because we need stronger measures to ensure that they respect human rights, the environment, as well as business practices, because some of the issues that we know we are fighting for right now includes probably gender equality. We've had the situations that are there in the different countries. We've heard of human rights. We've heard of climate crisis. We've heard of digital privacy. So all these are issues that need to be held accountable by the respective multinational companies. So Another thing that we've had is the main topic of today. Despite our generational differences, we found there's a common shared ground, and there's a lot of shared understanding and relatability between various activists. There's something that we all find similar, probably from the younger generation to the older generation. So it's just about learning each other and working collaboratively, just to keep the spirit of activism alive, even in the future generations. So let's not forget the importance of intergenerational collaboration, because I believe by coming together, as we have heard from our different speakers tonight, we have had, even from their different backgrounds, coming together, we can create more powerful movements and ensure there's sustainable growth of activism across generations. And if right now we had a very deep discussion from AshaDii and on how technology advancement and digital advancement is key, especially in this day and age, in portraying your message across. So in a nutshell, this is a conversation that will keep going, and we'll keep tackling, and we'll keep asking the same questions. And we have actually learned that we don't even really need a rule book in this, because to begin with, as Rachel questioned me, there's actually no rule book to this. We don't need to follow the rule book as it has been portrayed out there. So I want to thank our speakers for tonight. Dr. Sarah Bireete, who is from Uganda, from the Global Network for Domestic Election Monitors, and she also introduced herself earlier on. We have AshaDii Abinallah from Tanzania, the CEO, Tech and Media Convergency, and we have Dada Rachael Mwikali from Kenya, from the Coalition of Grassroots Human Rights Defenders. My apologies from Dr. Ananilea Nkya from Tanzania. She was not able to join us tonight, but she passes her regards, and we hope next time we'll get to hear from her. So asanteni sana our speakers, and also thank you so much to our participants for listening in and contributing. I've seen some of the messages that you have shared today. We'll keep this conversation going in, because it doesn't end here. So let's carry this momentum forward into the new year. Let's stay committed to justice, equality, and fighting for a better future, even with the next generation to come. On behalf of Mwanzo TV, I've been your host, Joy Chepto, and I'm wishing you all a Merry Christmas and a Happy New Year. May the next year, 2025, bring more victories and success for the causes we hold so dear. So thank you so much to our audience. And if you've not gotten a chance to watch the stories of our lovely speakers tonight, that is Dr. Bireete, AshaDii, Rachael Mwikali, and Dr. Ananilea, please head over to Mwanzo TV YouTube under the playlist Shangazi Power. Watch, they all have very, very insightful stories of their journeys. It has not been easy, and some of them have gone through the most, but they still keep fighting for the good cause until today. So thank you so much for joining the conversation. Have a lovely night.
Thank you, Joy. Bye-bye, everybody.
Thank you, Joy. Thank you, everyone.